Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy Roll Good. We are continuing our series here for the changes to the martial base classes, not the subclasses, but just the base classes. So today we are talking about the Paladins. So the Paladins have been pretty pragmatically permutated. So what does that mean? What are we looking at with the Paladins today? So as far as the core traits, these are just the traits that you get when you become a Paladin, like their skills and things like that. The only real changes, again, with pretty much every class has had this similar change, is the starting equipment has gone from a selection of two different kinds of equipment to option A being an equipment package, and then option B is basically replacing the optional starting wealth from the 2014 Player's Handbook. And the math usually works out that it's either average or slightly above average of what the previous optional starting wealth was before. As far as the multi-class inheritance, and what I mean by multi-class inheritance is what core traits do you get when you become a paladin from another class? The only thing here is that simple weapons have been removed, and the only reason simple weapons have been removed is because all classes now get simple weapon proficiency just as a baseline. Moving on to level 1 features, we can see that Lay on Hands no longer cures disease. They also removed text that didn't allow it to affect constructs or undead. I think this might be because there are some actual player species now that are actually constructs. I don't know if there's one that's technically undead yet, but there might be. And they can always just put like text in a stat block for monsters that they can't be healed normally, so that might be the case. As far as spellcasting goes, spellcasting is now available at level 1 up from level 2. The number of prepared spells is a fixed value based on the Paladin class table, starting with 2 spells at level 1 and then up to 15 at level 19. It used to be their charisma score plus half their Paladin level. And then they, of course, added the weapon mastery feature, so they get 2 weapon masteries at level 1. You can switch them both after a long rest if you so choose. They only get 2 ever, unlike the Barbarian and the Fighter, who get more as they level up. The Paladin only gets 2. And then Divine Sense, this was previously part of the level 1 features in 2014. This has actually been moved down to level 3 in the Paladin, and it's now baked into their Channel Divinity feature. So regarding the no longer curing disease with Lay on Hands, there was some talk during the playtest that diseases are going to work off the poison condition or poison or somehow be related to poisons in general. So it's very likely that Lay on Hands still cures disease, but it's just based off curing poison, which it can still do. I would expect to see more guidance on that within the new DMG, probably within the DM Toolbox Chapter 3. As far as spellcasting goes, the number of prepared spells is effectively no different. You always had, if you had a +5 to your charisma, you would have 15 spells prepared as a paladin previously. And then getting spells at level 1 actually makes Paladin a true half-caster now, very similar to the Artificer. And what this means is that when you are multi-classing into a Paladin, let's say you only take 1 level in Paladin, that first level in Paladin is still considered a 1 level in a spellcasting class, whereas previously it was half a level. So this means that if you are a sorcerer, for example, and you take 1 level in Paladin, it doesn't set back your spell slot progression. It'll just set back your sorcerer's spell selection progression. Will be about half a level behind, but you'll still have the same number of spell slots as you would as a full caster of your character level. But the moment that you take that second level in Paladin, if you're trying to get access to smites, then you are technically essentially basically like half a level behind in your spell slot progression. And finally, this is basically just a buff to all. I mean, basically, you don't need to have spellcasting to do this, but all ritual spells can be cast as a ritual by anyone who has that spell, whether you know it, whether you have it prepared, whether it's from a feat or whatever it is. As long as you have that spell, you can cast it as a ritual. You don't need to have a ritual casting feature. Moving on to the Paladin spell list changes. So this is only a comparison between the 2014 Player's Handbook and the 2024 Player's Handbook. There's a bunch of spells that were added in between, but we're just looking at one handbook to the other, just in case you're playing in a setting where you're only using the Player's Handbook for 2024 and forward. You're not using previous supplements. In that case, we can see that Divine Smite was added at level 1. So Divine Smite is now an actual spell. It was kind of nerfed a little bit. We'll talk about that at level 2. But I technically added that as a brand new spell because it wasn't a spell before. At level 2, there was added Gentle Repose, Prayer of Healing, and Warding Bond. And then there was nothing at level 3 or 4. And then at level 5, we're seeing Greater Restoration as well as Summon Celestial added. So a lot of these, the ones with the asterisks next to them, weren't previously on the Paladin spell list, so they're brand new. And everything else was probably either included in Xanathar's Guide to Everything or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, or some supplement where they were added to the Paladin spell list before, but they've now been officially added to the Paladin spell list within the player's handbook. All right, moving on to level 2, they've added they didn't add the fighting style, but the fighting style has been moved to level 2. This is down from level 1, but it now includes the Blessed Warrior style, which is from Tasha's Cauldron and Everything. This one allows you to choose 2 cleric cantrips of your choice, and they count as paladin cantrips for you or paladin spells for you. They use your charisma modifier when you're using them as a spell. And then whenever you gain a paladin level, you are allowed to replace one of those cantrips with another cleric cantrip. All right, so moving on to Divine Smite. This is sort of the new big change about paladins that people are either okay with or not happy with, is that Divine Smite is now a spell granted to the paladin that requires a bonus action to cast. It is still on hit, so you can, as part of your attack action, you can hit a creature with an attack, and if you do hit, then you can use your bonus action to use a spell slot to cast Smite. This is the same for all the other, like your Wrathful Smites and things like that. When you get this feature, you always have the base Divine Smite spell prepared. It otherwise works exactly, as far as the damage goes, it works exactly like the old Divine Smite. It just now requires a bonus action on hit. This means if you have a bonus action attack and you hit with it, you cannot smite on that attack. So there's a lot of explosiveness with the Paladin that has been nerfed a little bit, but it's easier for the DM to plan around that. So we'll see how many tables actually end up ignoring such a rule. And you do get 1 free casting of it per long rest. So once per long rest at least, you can just smite at first level just for free. Moving on to level 3, we see that Channel Divinity was changed a little bit. Like I said before, the Divine Sense is baked in as a base option for Channel Divinity, whereas there wasn't a base option for Channel Divinity as for the Paladin class. They were all part of the actual subclass features. It now has 2 uses up from 1, and then you get 3 uses at level 11. You regain 1 use on a short rest, and you regain all uses on a long rest. And then the Divine Health feature was removed. This was the feature that made you immune to disease, but again, diseases are likely working off poison mechanics. So again, you can basically lay on hands yourself and just heal yourself of a disease if that ever comes up. Again, that's assuming that's how it's going to work. Moving on, there's a quick section about Oathbreaking in the player's handbook. So it says, breaking your oath, a paladin tries to hold to the highest standards of conduct, but even the most dedicated are fallible. Sometimes a paladin transgresses their oath. A paladin who has broken a vow typically seeks absolution, spending an all-night vigil as a sign of penitence, or undertaking a fast. After a rite of forgiveness, the paladin starts fresh. If your paladin unrepentantly violates their oath, talk to your DM. Your paladin should probably take a more appropriate subclass, or even abandon the class and adopt another one. So I just thought this was a really interesting blurb that they put in the player's handbook, because I don't think there was really a lot of guidance here before for it. Because originally the Oathbreaker was supposed to be a villainous class option, but of course players love it so much because it was originally only in the DMG. And it might even still be. They didn't put the Oathbreaker in the player's handbook, right? So we don't even know where that is, although technically it still exists because, again, it's backwards compatible and all that. But I like the idea where it kind of gives guidance as to how you can regain your oath through this sort of all-night vigil or some other sign of penitence, or just the suggestion that, hey, if for some reason you're just not behaving like a paladin should, assuming that you're kind of playing that fantasy of the traditional paladin, then you can just play a different class if your DM, if you discuss that with your DM, and that seems like the best course of action. Because I don't think that comes up enough. I mean, I know it comes up when players say that they're just not happy with the class that they're playing. It's like, hey, we can just we don't need to kill your character. We can just kind of shift your character to something that you're more interested in. We can kind of make up however that works out. But I like that there's just this sort of official guidance, even if it's just for the paladin class. I think we can easily expand that to other classes. Moving on to level 5, we have Faithful Steed. This is a new feature that grants the Find Steed spell. I think some people were just not terribly happy about this. I mean, I guess they would rather see a different feature, but they kind of feel pigeonholed into being a mount class. But that's not necessarily, you don't have to do that. You get it once for free. You don't have to mount it yourself. You can give it to an ally. You can do a lot of different things with it. The Find Steed spell itself has been changed a little bit. So it actually has a few different options that it can do. But again, you don't need to make this your whole personality. You can just, use it at least once per day when you're traveling along and move a little bit faster. It's still nice. It's not something we didn't have before. And, if you wanted to play that sort of cavalier and use the mounted combatant the feat and build a character around that, you now have a class that just has a mount baked into it, which is always nice to see. We didn't really have that option before, except for like the artificer, the battlesmith, who could technically use their construct as a mount. There was always ways to do it, but this one is actually an official mount. Moving on to level 6, we see the Aura of Protection. This is one of the big features for the Paladin that everyone loves. So it's been nerfed ever so slightly that it becomes inactive now if you're incapacitated, which was previously it was just always active. So this means basically just if you're caught sleeping and someone casts a fireball on you, then it doesn't work. I think this one's a little weird. I think most, like, for evasion, this makes sense because you can't evade while you're sleeping, so to speak. But I think, like, an aura, we just think of it like an aura. I don't think you need to be awake for that, but I guess they think so. Sad to see this one go, but I guess it's whatever. I don't think it's not often that you're ever incapacitated in combat. I know there's a lot more spells that do incapacitate now, like the Psychic Lance and things like that. But I think it's pretty rare that this will come up. Moving on to level 9, we have Abjure Foes. So this is a sort of a new feature, technically. It's basically an alternate use of your Channel Divinity option. It basically allows you to frighten a number of creatures within a 60-foot radius from you, and then that frighten condition ends on when they take damage. However, I think this is also a replacement of many of the subclass options for Channel Divinity, because a lot of them had an effect similar to this. So I think they just added that to the base class, so you have more options as a base class Paladin. And then moving on to level 10, we have Aura of Courage. This now specifically provides immunity to Frightened, whereas previously it just prevented the Frightened condition, but it's now specifically immunity to Frightened. Just a small wording change there. And then it now also suppresses the Frightened condition on allies who enter the area, whereas previously it only prevented being frightened while you were in it. It was easy for a DM to kind of rule it that way, that while you're in the aura that you wouldn't be frightened even if you were already frightened. But now that mechanic is actually baked into the explicit text of the feature. So if you are already frightened and you move into it, you are not considered frightened while you're in it, but if you exit it, then you are frightened again. Moving on to level 11, we have Radiant Strikes. This is just a rebranded, improved Divine Smite. The only real change here is that it now extends explicitly to unarmed strikes, whereas previously it was specifically melee weapons. At level 14, we have Restoring Touch. This is a rebranded Cleansing Touch. It can now end a blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, paralyzed, or stunned condition on an ally. Originally it ended a spell effect. It can now also be used as many times as you have hit points of healing available in your lay on hands pool. Whereas previously, it was a number of times equal to 1 plus your charisma modifier. So yeah, I think you'll likely get to a point where you can use this more often than you previously could. Now, I think this is technically slightly better than the old one. The old one just ended a spell effect. I don't know if there are spell effects not included in here. It doesn't include like incapacitate, of course, but I think most of these effects can be included on spells, but they can also be applied by mini monster or even just environmental things that can cause this condition. So now it applies to a bigger breadth of things. So I think that's good. At level 19, we jumped straight to 19. This is where the Epic Boon comes online. And again, this is not something that you need to be level 19 in a specific class to do. It's just once you are character level 19, if you get an ASI/feat option, you can now choose one of the Epic Boons for that feat instead of one of the regular general feats. So we're looking at the summary of the Paladin base class. You can see that Divine Smite was nerfed. Again, smites being limited to once per turn because it requires your bonus action does dramatically reduce the explosive potential of Paladins. I think this is generally healthier for the game, although it is less fun, but I think it's just healthier so that things don't get exploded on round 1. And then you can technically still get at least 2 smites per turn by multi-classing 5 levels into Warlock with Pact of the Blade and Eldritch Smite, because that Eldritch Smite doesn't require your bonus action or any other action economy, but I believe it's still limited to once per turn. And then Divine Health was nerfed because it no longer makes you immune to disease, but we saw that we're assuming that based on the playtest that diseases will work off poison condition, and then you can just lay on hands, heal yourself of a disease that way. And then Aura of Protection was nerfed ever so slightly because it can't be used while you're incapacitated. But everything else was pretty much buffed across the board. They have a few new features, or new-ish features, like Abjure Foes, I think was again based on a lot of the channel divinities from the subclasses. It just feels bad about just the smite thing. I think feels bad, so it's hard to feel excited about Paladins because they mostly got nerfed, and it doesn't necessarily feel like all the buffs here make up for that nerf. But I think they're still going to be fun to play. Like, a Paladin's still going to feel like a Paladin. You still got your aura. You can still smite. You have better access to the smite spells. You at least get 1 free per turn. I kind of wish that the number of free smites per day scaled a little bit better. But, you know, it is what it is. So let me know what you're most excited about for the Paladin class. You know, what do you think of the smite changes? Are you going to be using the rules as it is, or are you going to adjust them a little bit? You know, I think it would be fair to at least not require it to be a bonus action. Use it more similarly to the other smite spells, where it's more of a just something that you cast on hit. I think that's pretty fair if you wanted to change that. That's probably the most I would do. I wouldn't let it be more than 1 per turn. I think that's a positive change overall. What do you think of Faithful Steed? Are there any builds that you're thinking of around that? Or, you know, giving it to your ally? Again, the Faithful Steed spell has changed. I'm not going to put it up on screen right here. You can look it up on D&D Beyond or wherever. You know, I might in the future make a video about all the spell changes, although I'm sure many other content creators have already done so. So again, let me know what you think down in those comments. And again, while you're on the way down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you keep on coming back to my videos and you're not subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot, but I appreciate your guys' time, and I'll see you in the next video for the Ranger. Thank you.